Did any of you happen to catch this meme by Lore of Myths? If you know anything about Hera, it makes sense. But what does it say about the ancient people that used to worship her? Hey all, Dr. V here from Movies We Dig podcast, and today I'm going to try and answer the question of why Hera chooses to punish Zeus's lovers and children. Now, in the past, you've probably heard me make the point that Greek myth as we have it today is likely a poor representation of how the gods were perceived and worshipped in ancient times. This is because most of the stories written down and preserved came from mostly elite, wealthy men of Greece and Rome. As such, Hera, as the nagging wife of Zeus, does not always gel with the fact that she was worshipped as the goddess of marriage. I suspect that many people, especially women, had a different perception of Hera than what has been preserved in myths today. If you want to see an awesome imagining of the Pelagasian Hera in her pre-patriarchal archaic form, check out this work from @Flaro. That's right, Hera was likely viewed much differently in older periods like the Neolithic and Bronze Age periods of the ancient Mediterranean world. Fun fact, Hera's worship at Olympia, where the original Olympic Games were held, predates that of Zeus. However, by the time we get to the recording of Greek myths and legends, Greek society had shifted towards a patriarchy, and the gods in these stories come to reflect that change. In other words, I think this meme is a very accurate representation for life of women in Greece starting around 800 BCE when we get the works of Homer and Hesiod written down for the first time. So why does Hera, a powerful goddess, take out her rage on the lovers and children of Zeus? Because in a patriarchal system, that is who she has power over. There's often this mistaken idea that with patriarchy, women hold no power, but that's not true. It's more about how power is expressed within that system. In her book, The Will to Change, one of my favorite feminist theorists, Bell Hooks, explains it like this. Patriarchy requires male dominance by any means necessary. Hence, it supports, promotes, and condones sexist violence. We hear the most about sexist violence in public discourse about rape and abuse by domestic partners, but the most common forms of patriarchal violence are those that take place in the home between patriarchal parents and children, meaning that mothers can also engage in this kind of power dynamic. For Hera in particular, this line from Bell Hooks is important to consider as well. By placing the blame for the perpetuation of sexism solely on men, women could maintain their own allegiance to the patriarchy, their own lust for power. They mask their longing to be dominators by taking on the mantle of victimhood. And we'll see that quite often with Hera, where she acts like a victim, even though she's inflicting a lot of violence on those that are more vulnerable for herself. At this point in ancient Greek society, aka about 8th century BCE, elite males like Zeus held the majority, but not all the power. One way to feel empowered within that system was to wield your own power over those who had less. Within a patriarchal household, for example, parents hold power over children. Hence why Hera is often directing her anger at the children of Zeus. Matriarchs like Hera could also hold power over slaves, which often found themselves vulnerable to sexist violence from the patriarch, which we might equate with the lovers of Zeus in this case. So that's not a great scenario, but Greek myths and legends also give examples of how patriarchal power can be challenged. Some of these attempts are successful, others not so much. We see two examples with Hera within the Iliad, and in this case, I'm using Emily Wilson's translation. So the first might be an example of what I would call subversive power. This refers to the attempt to overthrow structures of authority. Scholars recently view subversion not necessarily against institutions like governments or states, but rather subversion of predominant cultural forces like patriarchy. So in Book 14 of the Iliad, we hear the story of Hera using deception to seduce her husband Zeus and then put him to sleep so that the Greeks can triumph over the Trojans. This is kind of interesting to note because female sexuality is necessary in a patriarchal society. You need children in order to perpetuate it. But it also means that female sexuality can be subversive and therefore dangerous, meaning that it also has to be controlled. Even though Hera is trying to subvert the power of Zeus, this is often very dangerous to do. And we see the results in Book 15, where when Zeus awakens, he turns his anger on Hera, and we learn of a past violent punishment that he's committed against her. He says, "I think you ought to profit first from the disgusting patchwork of deceit when I give you a whipping. Do you not remember when I hung you in the sky and clipped 2 anvils to your feet and bound a golden chain around your hands and wrists that could not be untied? You dangled there, suspended in the air amid the clouds. All of the other gods on Mount Olympus stood round appalled, but could not set you free. And anyone I caught, I grabbed and hurled over the threshold of the sky and down to earth debilitated. As in, if anyone even tried to help Hera, Zeus used violence against them in order to maintain his position as the patriarch. In order to prevent any harm coming to herself this time, Hera defends herself by saying, I swear by earth and by the spacious sky above, and by the waters of the Styx below, which is the greatest and most fearsome oath for all the gods who live at ease, and by your holy head, and by the bed we share, our lawful marriage bed, which I would never betray. It is not by my will, I promise, that Lord Poseidon, shaker of the earth, is harming Hector and the Trojan people and helping their opponents. So, in other words, Hera, who was trying to subvert the power of Zeus, is actually putting the blame on another patriarch, Zeus's brother Poseidon, in order to protect herself from violence. So, again, this goes back to the bell hooks quote, where Hera claims victimhood, hereby reaffirming her place in the patriarchal hierarchy as the wife of Zeus. However, there is another instance where Zeus is prevented from using his own power, and that is through the threat of collective action. In this instance, Zeus's son Sarpedon is fated to die, but Zeus considers interfering, suggesting that he actually has the power to change this. Hera stops this attempt by saying, What? What have you said, disastrous child of Kronos? You want to free from painful death a mortal whose lot was dealt out long ago? Then do it, but none of the Olympians supports you. Now let me tell you this, take it to heart. If you convey Sarpedon to his home alive, watch out. Some other gods may also decide to take their offspring from the battle. Around the mighty town of Priam fight numerous sons of other deathless gods who may do likewise and incur your rage. And because of this threat of collective action by all the Olympians, Zeus concedes to this threat of the other Olympians turning on him. So why does Hera tend to target Zeus's lovers and children instead of the god himself? Well, because in a patriarchal structure, that is who she can wield power over with minimal threat of violence towards herself. As a result, Hera becomes a model for the ways in which certain women could wield power in the ancient Mediterranean world. Thanks for listening, and check me out on Movies We Dig, the podcast. Bye.